Good evening, fellow alcoholics and friends. My name is Alabam, and I'm a grateful, happy alcoholic. Yeah, forgot what I was. I'm glad to be here, but I say that everywhere I go. I'm just glad to be alive. I'm glad to be sober. I'm glad to be where I was invited to come. And tomorrow I'm going to be glad to know where I've been and with whom I was there with. It's a switch for a drunk like me. I was sitting there thinking that these people all have done so well time-wise, but none of them are 72 years old. And you know, it's a long story by the time you hit 72. If I'd known I was going to make it, I would have taken better care of myself. When I got here, all I wanted was just to die sober. You know, I mean, literally, that's the truth. I am a happy alcoholic, and it is a pleasure to be in Bakersfield especially. I lived here when I was approximately 3.5 years sober, and I was married to a man that I loved very, very much, and he was killed in an automobile accident. And you people helped save my sobriety and life. You walked me through it. I remember that after a couple of weeks after he was dead, I was doing a lot of poor me, poor me, poor me. And a couple of young men from down at the club came up to me after a meeting and said, Alabam, it's going to be pour me a drink if you don't quit it. And they said, are you eating solid food yet? And I said, of course not. I can't swallow it. They said, we're going to take you to an all-night restaurant. And if we will chop your food up for you, and we'll spoon feed you if necessary, but you are going to eat a steak, potatoes, and a salad. And they meant it, and they did, and I did. And they took me home. And they had been over there many times because Jim and I always had a lot of alcoholics in our home. And they said, Alabam, if you're not comfortable in what you have on, want to get your girdle off or something, go ahead and do it. We're going to be here a while. We got some talking to do. And they told me that if I didn't start thinking about somebody besides poor me, that I was going to be drunk, and that I best get it back in there and start working with the girls and trying to carry the message to them, and to think of somebody else sometimes. And they said that I ought to be on my knees once a day thanking God that I had had a marriage a year and a week that was good, that the two of them had never had one of any duration that was good. And they might never. And they said, Alabam, if you would, you best start thanking God for what you've had. You better start thanking him. Those men stayed until 7 o'clock the next morning, and they did the most thorough inventory that I have ever taken. And I'm grateful to them for it. I was so happy when they left that I went out. No, I went out with them in my robe in Bakersfield at 7 o'clock in the morning and kissed them both goodbye. And my neighbors were coming out with their briefcases going to work. And Bakersfield isn't exactly Hollywood. And I didn't give a damn. It just didn't matter. I felt like that these two men had saved my life. And then there was another man that entered into the picture. Men always entered into my story. If they didn't, I'd make it happen. And still do. But anyhow, what happened was that a man called me and said that he had brought this young woman to some meetings, but she just couldn't make it and live at home, that her family had no understanding of alcoholism. And would I be good enough to let her stay in my house for a day or two until they could find a place for her? And I, of course, said yes, and I've forgotten how long she stayed. And it doesn't matter. It was the greatest thing that could have happened to me at the time. And she had a boyfriend that was still drinking, and I invited him over and fed him too, to carry the message to him. And I got back in service. And I am so grateful to people that have loved me enough in AA to tell me the truth. I came to my first AA meeting in 1951. Well, first, I just get the record clear. I've been sober 32 years and a half, and I'm impressed. I'm impressed what God and Alcoholics Anonymous could do for me that I could not do for myself. I'm impressed that I have wanted to be here this long, and that I would love to be here forever. A day at a time, as long as I live. That's what I really want. And I went to my first meeting in North Hollywood. Now, North Hollywood's my home group, and I think it's the finest group in the world, and I hope you feel the same way about yours. But if you don't run off to somebody else's and louse it up. Just stay where you are and get in there and start giving of yourself. I find the more I give of myself to the group, the better I like the group. And, but in here, I went to my first meeting out of Dr. Shara's dry. We didn't have comp care and all those things then. We had dries, and that's literally what they were. You dried out there. And I flew in. My husband would put me on a plane from Las Vegas and have a taxi meet me over at Burbank to take me to the dry. And I didn't like Dr. Shara's methods of sobering people up. He used formaldehyde and pills. And I had had a love affair for years with alcohol. It had jilted me, but by the time it jilted me, I was so sick I didn't know I was jilted. And I didn't cheat on alcohol. I didn't take those pills. And I explained that to the doctor. And he said, well, how do you get sober? And I said, I sober up with whiskey. And he said he could give me an ounce or so every 6 hours. Well, any fool knows that won't keep you out of DTs or convulsions. Now, I've never had a convulsion, but you don't know when you go get them. And I certainly had DTs, and I didn't want them. And so there was a man named Orville C., who is now dead, and he died sober, who had gone through Dr. Shara's, and he came over one day and said, could he take some of us to the Tuesday night beginners meeting at North Hollywood? And I thought that'd be a good way for me to get out and get a bottle. So I said, I'd like to go. I raised my hand. Then I decided I didn't have the proper clothes to wear. So I called Boulder City and had them, Las Vegas rather, and had them call their manufacturers down in L.A. to send me out an understated navy blue suit. I wanted to be sure that I was dressed properly for the occasion. And they sent me an original, and I go in it. That's the last original I've had. I go in it with a little blue hat on with a veil that covered the eyes, which was really helpful. And my white pearls and my white gloves. And on the way over, I asked Orville to stop and let me get a bottle, and he said that he wasn't going to buy me a bottle, and I said, I didn't ask you to. And he said, well, the doctor takes all your money. I know you don't have any. Well, nobody ever takes all of my money. I learned that the first hospital I ever went in. Sometimes it costs money to send out to get whiskey. And I just carried it in my bra. In fact, I carried my bottle up there a good part of the time. I have had surgery on the breast 3 times. It was not malignant, but if it had been, it would have been self-inflicted. But see, I knew that a policeman would not examine me. He'd have to go get a policewoman to examine, to reach up there. And I also knew that doctors preferred a nurse would make the search. And I'd get rid of anything given a moment's notice. Just used to it. I've thrown bottles so far out in the weeds I couldn't find it. But anyhow, he didn't want to stop. I insisted, just put me out, and I'd go back to the hospital and by cab. But he decided it was better to bring me and a bottle than not to bring me. And we went. And I didn't like the way it looked. It looked like a church. It actually was an Episcopal school at one time. And it had all of those cliches on the wall like easy does it. And you and I know easy never did anything. We always did it the hard way. And then first things first, and I caught on immediately. I knew that meant you got the bottle before you could drink it. And then think. I'm not certain that should be on our walls yet. But I wondered if they didn't know the reason I drank so much at night was because I couldn't turn my head off. That those thoughts, I couldn't stand to think what I had become and the things that I had done. I wasn't raised to do those things. God knows I certainly blamed it on the alcohol. I thought that the alcohol made me do the things that I did. It made me do all of that stinking thinking that I did. I didn't believe a nice woman like me would do it. And you know, after I got sober, I realized alcohol can't think. And it can't act. And here I have blamed everything all of my life, drinking life, on the alcohol. And knowing I would not do those things sober. Well, that isn't true. And that isn't true at all. And those are the kinds of things I had to face in my inventory that I didn't like facing. And I had nothing to blame it on except me. I had to accept the responsibility for what I had become. Well, at that meeting that night, we got an overhang thing, and we got a recast sign, and at that time, a light blinked on and off in it. Now, people thought I had DTs when I told them about it later, but the man that put it up said it had Christmas tree lights in it. And, oh, God, don't you love to be right? That's something I still like. But things went fairly well until a man got up and talked about being in Lincoln Heights. And everybody laughed and looked at each other and winked, and I didn't know what Lincoln Heights was. And so I punched Arvel, and he said, it's a big jail facility. And I sat there and thought to myself, if I'd been in jail, I certainly wouldn't tell anybody. And I didn't really think it was bad that he had been in jail, but to tell it at a social gathering. But that wasn't the worst thing that happened. The next man that got up said he had been in a penitentiary. And I thought, poor man, he does not know you don't tell this. And my heart really went out to him. And I just thought it was such a shame that he wasn't taught what you say in public. And after I was sober 2.5 years, this man that I loved so much named Jim had been in a penitentiary. And he got in the penitentiary for doing the same things I did. He wrote big, bad checks. But it was a difference there. My husband, first husband, who lived for 16 years of my drinking, he covered my checks. And then when he died, my father and my brothers covered my checks until you Al-Anons got to him and told him about releasing me with love. And I thought I'd get even with you, so I told some of you that I thought maybe your husbands took over there. But anyhow, my checks got covered. And then Jim's mother went nearly bankrupt trying to keep him out of jail, and his wife divorced him. She could not pay his bills. Jim and I both thought the best was not good enough for us. The best being money-wise, you know. And Jim's bank cut his bank accounts off. My bank never did, and Jim had to use other people's bank accounts. And we both wrote checks for over $1,000, so that's where he landed. He was a hell of a man. He was a prince of a man. And we enjoyed our stay up here so much. We loved it, and we both tried to be of service and so forth. I'm grateful, as these men said, I'm grateful for that year and a week. I have the 2 husbands dead, and I'm divorced. My motivation for marriage was not good. I didn't want to go to work. Any of you ever felt that way? I certainly mustn't be the only woman here that's done it. I don't mind working now. I don't mind at all. In fact, I didn't like reality when I came here. I still don't like a lot of the reality. But I like the fact that I can walk through reality sober. That I've actually learned to like to work. And when my sponsors in Independence told me that in 1952 that I couldn't be a parasite and stay sober, and that I must get a job and go to work, they called it. And that word work grated on my ears. I asked them to spell it if they had to use it. And they told my family not to send me any money for 1 solid year. And they knew my estate was all tied up, and I couldn't draw any more money on the estate. It had cost a lot to charter planes to go from dry states to wet states. And ambulances are very expensive, and nurses around the clock, and checked in 2 hotels, staying in the 3rd one in New York runs in money, especially if you spend the summer there. And money went awfully fast with me. I spend more money in a month than I make in 6 now, you know. But that's all right. It took every bit of it. If I had done anything less than I did, or been any less sick than I was, and that was mighty sick, I don't think I'd made it here. But I had to be dying before I was willing to surrender. I really didn't surrender, come to think of it. The whiskey surrendered me. I was too sick. I couldn't fight it any longer. But I went to, my family found me in New York. It's a long story how I got there and got back. But in essence, I went to meet a man's family that wanted to marry me. He didn't know me very well. And I didn't know him at all. I thought he drank like I did. But he was a heavy social drinker. And I hadn't fit that category in a long time. And when I got there, we celebrated. He took me out to his place in Connecticut, and God, it was good-looking land, and I knew something of the value of it. And he had a good job. He was was with a big company, an executive, and I wondered if I could get drunk and sober before he made it home every weekend. You know, I just figured might work. And I didn't really know the man. We were listening to a ball game one afternoon. His family had all gone off visiting neighbors, and I'm just dying for a drink. And after the game's over, I said, "Carl, let's have a drink." And that man made one of the most foolish remarks I ever heard. He said, "It's too early." Never heard anything so ridiculous. And he said, "And besides, we don't want to drink alone." I didn't care whether he drank with me or not. And I decided I didn't know much about this man, so I started asking him questions, about what other sports did he like besides baseball, and what plays did he like, and what books did he like, and, where had he traveled, and how much more traveling did he want to do, all the things that trying to get to know him within 5 minutes if possible. And I found out the only thing we had in common was baseball. And I knew the season was too short. And he wouldn't give me a drink. So I called a cab, and it was about 13 miles there each way. And I came back with a bottle for the house and a bottle for me. I had brought my own bottle, but I had given out. That was the bottle you take with you to drink between social drinks. And I brought that into the kitchen, and do you know that man took that bottle away from me? And I picked up a Coke bottle with the top on it, and I aimed it at his head. And he saw me pick up the bottle, and he put the chair up like that, and I busted the chair. And his dear little mother is standing by him. Now, she was the woman that I'd overheard say to some of the daughter-in-laws that I was a lovely southern belle. Well, I want to tell you, the bell quit chiming. And they were clanging, just clanging. And I asked them, would they drive me to New York before they asked me to leave. And I met another man there. I was always meeting men, and I liked it. I met another man there, and I'm sitting across the table having lunch with him, and he looks at his watch, and he says, we best hurry. And we just ordered a fresh bottle of champagne. I don't like champagne, but we were celebrating something. I knew almost for sure that we were. And I said, what's our hurry? And he said, we don't want to miss our plane. Well, I don't know where we're going. And you know how you sort of will hedge for time. And I said, couldn't we take a later one? And he said, no, it would make us late in Miami to pick up our marriage license. I give you my word of honor, I studied his features carefully. I remembered which hotel I met him in. And I remember a woman introducing us, but I didn't know her name. And I couldn't remember his. I'm getting scared. Here I am going to Miami to marry a man whose name I can't remember. I do recall that we have called a woman, a lovely, lovely lady. She was possibly 75 or 80 at the time. And she knew the family and said that they were first family in Florida, and that they Episcopalians, said which she thought was most important. And I was an Episcopalian. And she said that they had a high-rise on Miami Beach, and that she thought it would be a very suitable marriage. And he talked to her, and he was most impressed, and they both were. I don't know what about, but... So I did remember there had been a conversation. And I'm frightened. I don't know this man, and here I am going to Florida with him. So I said, you're right, I must hurry. I'll go in and I'll go to the bathroom and come back, and we'll finish drinking this bottle of champagne, and then I'm going and start packing. And when I was in the bathroom, I found out it was another exit to that restaurant other than the one that the entrance we'd come in, and I've never seen him since. Now, things got hard up for me, financially, and I've looked. I look at internationals every 5 years. I look at prisons. I look at hospitals, veteran hospitals, and I just never have seen him. And I'll keep looking. I expect he's been killed, dead, or something. That man carried a wad of money like I have never seen anybody. I think you had to be insane to carry that much money, because he offered it to me one night. And I recall that, to buy a trousseau. And as I told my sponsor when I got in AA, I wanted this man to know we didn't have any women with enough sobriety to sponsor anybody as sick as me. So I had 4 men sponsors, and every one of them good ones. And all 4 of them died sober. And men that I loved, and I loved their wives too. They were great to me too. But anyhow, I explained to this man, the one that my spiritual sponsor, I wanted to explain to him that I was different from the other girls in the group. The transients that would get coming in by and so forth. And that I explained that I'd been offered all this money to buy a trousseau, and I told him that that ladies didn't accept money from gentlemen they weren't married to buy clothing. Now, to show you how phony I was, and I don't know whether any of you will identify or not, but I didn't tell my sponsor that I got up out of his bed to explain what ladies did. And I'd been sober a little while before I went back to my sponsor and said, I've been telling you half-truths. And I tried to make myself sound good. And I'm glad that I do know me a little bit better now. And I realize I don't have to tell everything I know. I just tell the nature of my wrongs, and you just write your inventory, and it'd be about the same as mine, I guess. I don't know. I know women that said they never did any of the things I did. They said that they drank in their own bedrooms, and I said, how dull. I can't imagine anything duller than to lock yourself up in your own bedroom. I drank in my own bedroom, too, but that was just when I wasn't out. You know. I drank anyway. It didn't matter. I came to, my brothers found me in New York. They traced me down. There was a nurse and a doctor in the room with me. I had already been in the hospital in New York. I was sent to Knickerbocker Hospital. That's where the moved old town's hospital to. Teddy, the red-headed nurse, was there. And I had already been there. And my family finally traced me down. The Waldorf Astoria called them and said that my brother, and said I owed him over $1,000, and said, why are you calling me? And said she represented your company. And he said, she doesn't represent me or the company. Well, anyhow, to make that story short, they found me in another hotel, and they asked, would they put me on a plane? And they said they doubted seriously if they could get me out on the field and on the plane up the ramp. And my brother told them that what you did, you got a fifth and you put it in a paper sack and you scrunched the paper around it so I could be sure it was a fifth, and that you walk ahead of me. And you put it on the seat and that I would sit there. And I did, and I fell off in my nephew's arms when I arrived in St. Louis. And my brothers told me they were going to have me incarcerated and declared incapable of managing my own affairs. And they told me they didn't want me in their homes anymore, that they didn't want their children to see their aunt, that they seemingly knew I was sick and not bad, and to let's keep it that way. They told me that I embarrassed their wives at all social events that I went to. And I embarrassed myself even. And they just preferred I'd not come around when I was drunk. They had given me jobs. They had offered to send me back to school. They had told me that if I wanted a small business of some kind, they'd help me get one started. They'd done everything they knew how to do, and then they released me with love. This brother came with the message. And see, these Al-Anons had gotten to him. And he came and he apologized for keeping me alive when apparently I didn't want to live. And they wanted me to forgive them for doing it. And he said that he'd talked to the doctor, and the doctor said I wasn't going to die of a malignancy. I was going to die of alcoholism. And he had told me that he had talked to the police, and he had told them to quit taking me home when I was drunk, to treat me like any other wino. And he says, and I asked him to put you in jail if you were out on the streets like any other common drunk. And he said, don't waste your nickel calling me. If you get in jail, I'm not going to bail you out. And he said, the whole family has agreed to abide by these things that I have told you. He said, now if you want to stay sober, and that means not drinking at all, there's not anything we wouldn't do for you. Not anything. And he said that we love you, but we not going to help you die. And he started crying. And he didn't even try to wipe the tears away, and he knew possibly every patient, doctor, and nurse in that hospital. And he told me how much he loved me before he left. And he told me later that he thought he was saying goodbye forever to me, because they thought that I was hopeless and helpless, and so did I. And I made a decision in that hospital. They kept me there 3 weeks trying to build me up so I wouldn't have to drink again. You know how that gets you in good shape to drink. And when I got out of the hospital, my family asked me to have dinner with them because they knew I was sober. And I went for dinner, and I came back to that apartment. And I don't know about you, but I'd been sober 3 weeks. And that was a record for me, The only other time I'd been sober for 3 weeks was when I was in a psycho. And I always stayed 3 weeks in psycho over at St. John's in Santa Monica. But while I was seeing the psychiatrist and taking Antabuse and drinking on top of it and so forth. And I got home from that place, and I couldn't stand the loneliness I felt. I was dry, and I remembered everything practically that I had ever done in my life. And these memories just made me so uncomfortable. I could not stand to think about what I had become. I hated me, and I hated everything that I had done in the past few years. And I was so lonely I wanted to die, and was afraid I would and afraid I wouldn't, all at the same time. And I just ordered a case of whiskey, and I wasn't expecting company. And I drank, and I didn't eat, or at least they said they saw no signs of my having eaten because the refrigerator was chock full of food still at the end of a week. And they said that it looked like I'd averaged 2 fifths a day without any food. And I had toxic poisoning from drinking too much too fast, and malnutrition, starving amid plenty. But that wasn't really what drove me insane. I had a sickness of the soul. The book says we have a spiritual illness. Sometimes they call it a soul sickness. It's more personal to me if I call it a sickness of the soul. And I just couldn't stand to face me, and any time I would come out of blackouts, wake up from having passed out, I couldn't stay passed out over 2 hours, and I had to think all over again. And I couldn't stand these thoughts. I just couldn't stand to think about what I had become. And a girl insisted, she called me. I don't remember ever calling anybody during this time, or any company or anything, and they saw no signs of it. And this girl came and said, "Please let me take you home with us." And she said, "Both my husband and I are in AA." I had been to AA in California and in Independence and in New York and around. And I said that I would have to have something to drink. Could I take my bottle? And she said no, that I couldn't take my bottle. They'd buy one. And so when we got there, I went. I don't know why, but I went. And I'm so grateful I did, because people like you came over that night to take care of me. And quite a few were non-alcoholic that came. And I started looking at your faces, and I saw something in your faces that I knew I had had in your eyes, that I had had at one time in my life. And all night long, the only thought I can remember from that whole night is trying to figure out what made you look like that, and what was it I had had that I had lost. I now realize it was self-respect and human dignity and purpose in living and all of those things that are so important to us, the most important things in our lives, and I had lost them all. And the next morning I told Earl, another one of my gentleman sponsors, that I wanted to get sober, but I said, "Earl, I think I'm going to die this trip." Now, I'd never thought I was going to die before. And he said, "Alabam, we know how sick you are, and we're trying to find a place to put you right now." There was a snowstorm there in Missouri, and no planes were flying. The hospitals in Independence and in Sedalia and around would not take me. I'd been to them before, and I gave them trouble. And they couldn't get me out on a plane to any place that had a place that they could get me dried out. And they called a man named Walt in Independence, Missouri, and asked him, would he please take me up there in this little place back of a club room where they detoxified men. And Walt said, "We have no place for a woman." And they said they understood, but nobody in Sedalia knew what to do for me, and the doctors knew less, or so they said. And they said, "Walt, you've been just where she is. She is in the same maniacal condition you're in." And then she'd be near Dr. Nason there from Kansas City, who was an authority in that part of the country on alcoholism, and an alcoholic. He's dead now, died sober. But Walt finally agreed that if the snowstorm stopped enough to get me there, to bring me, to give me whiskey so I could make the trip. And they took me in this snowstorm, and men came and took me head first up the 12 steps. I didn't know it was 12 steps until I was sober. And a girl that I was the sponsor was being brought up, and she counted them, and she said 12 steps to recovery. 12 steps to recovery. But I was too sick to know that at the time. I was so grateful to be there and to find the love that I found from these people there. But I went insane. And for 5 days a night it looked very, very bad. Dr. Nason was making 2 trips a day, and Walt was having to stay with me. Is my watch right? I have 9.
You're right.
Is that right? And Dr. Nason was coming over twice high. And and he was a wonderful man. He knew all of the old-timers. And it just didn't look good. The prognosis wasn't good at all. And the doctor said he could put me in the hospital over in Kansas City because I was critically ill, but that I'd have to be put in restraints. And he said if I was put in restraints, he was afraid that they were afraid that I would fight them and that my heart wouldn't last, that it wasn't doing well. The adrenaline was pumping too fast, and they thought if I didn't die of a heart attack that I'd go totally insane and have a wet brain. And it just didn't get any better. And at the end of the 5th day, nobody could manage me except Walt, because he'd been where I was. The doctor told him that I could kill him with my bare hands, and he said, Doctor, I've been right there. You know I have. And you and the men came and got me and took me out of jail to your basement, and you took care of me. I know where she is every minute. I'm not afraid of Alabam. She's not going to hurt me. I'll stay with her if you're a doctor. And he told me at the end of the 5th day, later he told me that they had gone as far as to ask the police if they might use the padded cell for me so I wouldn't kill myself or somebody else. I never had any thoughts of killing myself, but they said that people either try to kill themselves when they go insane like that or kill somebody else. And when they're in maniacal condition. And Walt told me that the doctor had done everything that medical science knew how to do, and that he had done everything that my family and their churches were praying, and that AA members were praying for my recovery that didn't even know me. And he said, Alabam, there's just nothing left for us to do, but there's something you might do. I don't know. He said, I can't promise you for sure it would work, but he said it did for me when I prayed. And he asked me, would I ask God to restore me to sanity and remove the obsession for me to drink on a lifetime basis, a day at a time. And I said, Walt, you know I can't remember that much. And he said, would you ask God to let you mean what you're going to repeat word for word after me? And I said, yes. And I asked God, and I repeated it word for word. And in a dirty bathroom that 12 men and I were using to get sober in, you can imagine the condition. This place was horrible looking. Clancy the Mission would not pick up any of the furniture from it. And in this dirty bathroom, I heard God, don't be frightened. If you'd been there, you wouldn't have heard a thing. But I heard God say to me that I could be sober and I could be sane on a lifetime basis, a day at a time. And I came out of the bathroom walking up the hall telling it. And they ran and got Walt and said, it's happened. She's gone totally insane now. And he says, what'd she say? And they repeated it and said, no, that's the sanest she's been in many years. And it was. But that wasn't the miracle that I heard it. What I heard was just the playback of what Walt had said over and over to me and what I had repeated after him. The miracle was that I believed it in 1952. December, around December 1st. I was so sick nobody had time to write down when I quit drinking. But I believed it. I believed that I could be sober and I could be sane. And my sponsor told me when I got a little bit better that I could. The doctor said I had an out-of-body experience. I described something that happened to him, which I won't bore you with, but Walt said that he was a spiritual awakening, and the doctor said an out-of-body experience, and I said, aren't they one and the same? Isn't it rebirth in the way you look at it? And do you know I hadn't slept in those 5 days and nights. I hadn't slept. And I went to sleep, and I slept like a child after this experience. I'd love to tell you I got well right away. I didn't. When you've been that sick, it takes a long time for recovery. I think the process is still going on. And I stayed at that place, and then it was hard on them to have a woman up there because the woman couldn't come in the room those 5 days that I was in such bad shape, but they were up there for looks, so people wouldn't talk about them having this woman up there with all men. And after a few weeks, Walt called my brother Dan and said that it was that I really needed to be there, but that the women, there were so few women in AA, and that Al-Anon women were just worn out coming up there staying, and that they could keep me there, but they just was getting somebody to come up there for. And they said, well, does she need somebody? And they said, we do it for looks, Mr. Robinson. He said, to hell with the looks. He says, you men stayed in that room. Walt, you stayed in that room with her when she was insane. She was up there in that condition. He says that we don't care how it looks. Please keep her if you can. Or if you can't, we'll get some nurses and bring her home or something, And Walt said, well, that's what we wanted to hear, that it was okay no matter how it looked, because she needs to be here. And I stayed there, and God, those men were good to me. They cared what happened to me. I've never had people do the things for me. Finally, one man, I said, my hair is so dirty. I couldn't stand it being this dirty. And one of the men went to Walt and said, Walt, if we'd leave the bathroom door open, would it be all right if I washed Alabam's hair? And those men just, God, they loved me back to sanity and to health. That's literally what they did. And they made me feel like that I was a good woman and that I had just been sick and not bad. And it took men to make me feel this way because of the past. But in here, as I'm staying there, my sponsor tells me it's time for me to get an apartment. And he wants me to get a job. And I don't want a job. I just plain don't want one. I told you how I felt about work. And do you know that man went and got one for me? He got a job for me clerking in Cat's Drug Company, a chain of Cat's drug company. It's 76 cents an hour. And when I bitched, he said I ought to pay them to teach me how to work. And I agree now. There was a man that came in my life while I was so sick up there, and this man thought that I was too lovely a woman to have to work. And I couldn't talk to anybody about this situation because to do so would have injured him and his wife's relationship with his wife. But he wanted to find me a nice apartment where a lady of my stature should live, And he did. And he had the minister's wife go with me so it would look above board. And and he was willing to support me in the manner which I had been accustomed to. But the reason I couldn't tell any human being there, because it wasn't but one man in the group that could afford to keep me the way I'd been accustomed to living. And I was so grateful when I got to California and could talk about it. I went to a minister and talked about it, but I even hedged. I hedged. It was something that I couldn't tell my sponsors because they would know right away who it was. I was speaking, Johnny was there too. I was speaking at, that little tiny place in Oklahoma. And they were going to take back to my sponsor one of the tapes, and I realized I had told the story on it. And God, I was afraid they were going to give John B. the tape of this before I could stop them. And I just told the man the truth, that I had told something in there that I'd rather they not know in Missouri. And I didn't use his name, but anybody in the group could have placed him. And I found out I met his wife, and I liked her better than I did him. So I gave up the relationship. He was a politician. That's the reason it was so necessary that we keep all of this quiet. And he was stealing money from them. You know, it was kind of in that gang that took the sack around and picked up the money. And you know, he handed me 100 off the top one night, and I couldn't stand it. I couldn't stand what I was becoming. I couldn't stand it, and I told him that I'd have to end it, and that I'd pay him back everything I owed him. And he said, no, nothing due. But these men knew it was hard for me to work. I had worked for family some. I had been company hostess some. I didn't do too well as company hostess. I did for years, but my drinking got worse, and I planned a party at a lovely club in North Carolina for the chairman of the board and the major stockholders of this mining company. And my first husband was a mining engineer and was manager of this mine. And I told him some silly little joke about the devaluation of the American dollar, and he looked at me and he said he didn't know I had communistic ideas. Well, you don't say that to a drunken rebel. You don't say it to a rebel, period. And I called him a son of a bitch. My husband had never heard me swear. I wasn't allowed in my home. And I also told him that my family was making this a safe democracy when his was trying to get steerage together. And it was the truth. My husband said I called him everything but a Christian and a sharecropper. So that's the only kind of work I'd ever done, sort of been hostess for the family business and then hostess for my husband's business. And now here I am working, and I had to punch a time clock. I had to join a union. My feet hurt at the end of the day. I had to go to work about the time I usually came in when I was drinking. I told my sponsor I didn't like it. And he told me to put a smile on my face and act as if I did. And he said, I'll just pretend that you do. And that was when pretend was so popular at the time. And then he would have some boys come up. If I didn't come back to I was supposed to go by that little clubhouse before I went to work at noon to get somebody to go and eat lunch with me, and at night as soon as I got off from work. And if I was kept to check out the cash registers or anything like that, somebody ambled up my way to see what was happening. They were afraid I'd stop for a bottle. And I would tell them, though, if I felt any desire to drink. And I lost the desire before too long, but I was afraid I couldn't stay sober. And I'm glad I was, because I did everything to the best of my ability at the time. It certainly wasn't. I never have done everything the best of my intellectual ability, but I've done it the best I could with the emotions I've got. And they would ask me how I treated my customers that day and what I ate. And if they didn't think I'd had enough proteins, they'd say, who's going to pop and buy the steak tonight? We all go have coffee while Alabam eats. And there wasn't much money in that group, and I had given up the only real money in it. And these boys waited for me, and they told me what they had been saying at the meeting. I couldn't go to the meetings because I had to work so late. And they'd tell me what had happened at the meetings, and then they'd tell me what I should have done differently with with the customer that I was rude to, or that was rude to me or something. And they encouraged me to keep being nice and to be a good saleswoman and so forth and so on. And at the end of, I think I had been working there 5 months and was 7 months sober, I was made manager of my department and buyer for my department. And my sponsor, I forgot to tell you, told me I had to wait 2 years or my references wouldn't be any good. I didn't know you didn't have to do what your sponsor told you to do. That's how sick I was. And I am so grateful I was that sick. I am so grateful I was that sick. And if you got a sponsor that loves you enough to tell you the truth, stick with them. Mine loved me enough to take my inventory on a daily basis. And these boys really were real proud of me. And we had a few girls start coming in by then, not an awful lot. But if you got over into Kansas City, there were some nice ladies. And after I got cleaned up and everything, these ladies wanted me to move my home group over with them over in the best part of Kansas City. And you know, somehow God gave me enough sense to know that I better stick with the people that knew all about me there in this little town and that had seen me insane, that dressed up over in Kansas City in that area, that I might start being the old Evelyn. The reason I used the name Alabam is I didn't like the things Evelyn did. I didn't like what Evelyn became. And I couldn't take an honest inventory. I just couldn't be honest with myself. But Alabam, the sober alcoholic who had never drunk, was able to sit down and write about a sick girl, Evelyn. And she could be realistic in taking Evelyn's inventory. And that's the way for me. Evelyn never takes her own inventory. Alabam takes it. And it's worked for me that way. It's worked for me. The sick girl, and I had compassion for Evelyn then when I realized how sick she was. But Alabam had compassion for Evelyn. It may not make sense to you, but I talked to a psychiatrist and they said it was a marvelous way to do it. But I'd already done it that way. And it worked for me. These boys would, I told you, would stay there and go over the day with me and so forth. And those men loved me like brothers. They truly did. And one day I went down. By this time, I've gotten them to let's have a little room for women to sober up in. And I give one of my nights off from work, I give to them, you know, to stay with the girls that are sick. And I'd been down at noon that day, as was my wont to do. And there was this girl that was real sick that they would come in and they were taking her upstairs. And I told her I'd be back to see her that night. So the boys said, come on over and join us. As I came in, I said, oh, boys, I can't. I got to go up and see the poor sick girl. They came in at noon. And I went up to see her. And I was wearing a halo on my trip. And if you've never seen an alcoholic with a halo, I hope you won't. They tarnish readily, and I think it's that toxic poisoning from too much whiskey. And they have a way of sliding down and blinding us. And that's the position I was in that night. And I came down and said to these men that knew me and knew what I was like and had known me all these years, and I said, oh, boys, I'm so glad I didn't go to the length the poor girl upstairs went to before I got here. And Dick, a wino, looked at me. And he said, Alabam, what she done you ain't done? And I said, Dick, she told every one of us at noon that she was a prostitute. I had to whisper it. I couldn't say the word. And he looked at me with those Al-Anon type eyes. And he said, Alabam, ain't we going to ever teach you the meaning of honesty? I said, I don't even know what you're talking about, Dick. And he said, self-honesty, self-honesty. Won't we ever teach you to be honest with yourself? And I said, I still don't understand. And he said, I believe you, Alabam. Don't you know the only difference in you and that gal upstairs is that you didn't know you could sell it. And besides, you didn't need the money. I'm grateful, folks, to be sober. I'm grateful to have had men in my life like them that love me enough. There are a lot of good women in my life now, and there were a few that were coming in at that time. But these men love me enough to tell me the truth about me, and they help me see the real me. And I think possibly one of the most wonderful things that has happened to me is that my sponsor told me that it would be an insult to God if I didn't forgive myself for the past. And folks, I carry no guilt with me today from the past. If I feel guilty today, it is because I am guilty. And it's new guilt. It's new guilt. I have forgiven myself. I try to carry the message. Sometimes I think not too well, and other times I think good. You know, what the hell do I know? But I love being sober. I love being able to make a living. I love being able to give a good day's work for what I'm paid. I love alcoholics. And I'm just looking forward to the rest of this convention. We've got speakers here, men that I love very much that are going to talk, and I'm looking forward to the rest of it. And I thank you for asking me here, and I thank God for my sobriety. And you new people keep coming back. It works, and it works real good. When I was a kid, I wished I could have lived in the days of the miracles, of the biblical miracles. I wish I could have seen Jesus perform them. Do you know that I see more miracles today than the Bible ever told me about? And I'm so grateful that I am one of the miracles, and that you miracles are here with us. I love being sober, and I love AA. Thank you.